Welcome. I'm Bart Poulson from datalab.cc, and this is the Data is for Doing office hour. And today we're going to talk about creative coding and how that can contribute to your own abilities and effectiveness as a data science person and really bring a little more fun to your life in the process. Now, if you're out there, I would love it if you could say hi in the comments and tell me your name and tell me where you're coming from. I'd love to see where you are. So let me just say hello and tell us where you are from. I am in Salt Lake City, Utah, and it is nighttime. And I'm actually going to talk to you guys a little bit about scheduling at the end of this event. Um, but if you're there, I would love to hear from you. Please make a comment and let me know if you're there. Raymond from Minnesota, thank you and welcome. Maybe it'll just be you and me. And we'll have a little personal fireside chat about creativity. But if anybody else is out there, I would love it if you could just put in a comment, say hello, and where you're from. Makul is checking in from Bangkok, Thailand. Wonderful, thank you. Abhineet is in India. And then we have a user in Chicago. Thank you for joining. I appreciate that. Again, one of the great things about doing these is I get to interact with people, not just from Utah, where I live, or from the Western United States, but from all around the world. I know that the videos I make for LinkedIn and for Data Lab have a global audience, but it's nice to see some of that happening right here. So Natarajan from Bangalore, India, and Rayat from British Columbia, Canada. It's wonderful. Thank you for saying hello. I'm grateful for that. I understand people may be coming in as we go, but if you do come in, please say hello in the comments and say where you are coming from, where you're located right now. I'd be grateful for that. But in the meantime, let me get started talking a little bit, give you a little bit of background about today's topic. Now, chances are, if you're here, then you know about my data work, probably through LinkedIn or, LinkedIn Learning, or through my own company, datalab.cc, or through my LinkedIn newsletter, Data is for Doing. There are other places too. But chances are you know about the data work that I do. On the other hand, I've also mentioned before that I'm not originally a data person. That's not where my formal training is. I'm a psychologist, but not a therapist. I'm a research psychologist. I have a bachelor's, I have 2 masters, and I have a PhD in social psychology. It's a research field. And I am a tenured university professor at Utah Valley University. But in the last 30 years, I have developed my own data skills. So I have learned the technical skills of working with data on my own, but uh, all the critical thinking and the contextual skills are things that took me years to acquire from graduate school while I was working in psychology. So that has made a big difference in what I do. But I want to back up a little bit further from that. So I'm working in data right now. My background, my academic background is in psychology, but for my first 3 years of college, and truthfully, from the time I was a tiny little kid, I wanted to be a designer. I studied design for my first 3 years in college. And I was studying industrial design, which at that point was, it was drawing classes. I mean, I had this amazing set of colored pencils. I drew in vellum. I had a drafting table because this was before computers were used for this. And I took classes with illustration majors, and um, it was a very, very different background. I ended up switching over to psychology when I was a senior. And, going into social psychology. And then at several years into that, I ended up starting to teach statistics. And that has led to my work in data. Um, but there's one other thing I need to mention that, again, I have mentioned in a couple of places before, and that is uh, my wife, who is upstairs at the moment. She's a modern dance choreographer, and she has been a working artist for her entire life. And we've been together for 28 years, and she's had an enormous influence on getting me involved in the arts after I switched out of design and into psychology and into the data. That said, I did have an interest in the arts when I was in graduate school in New York City. I went to the Museum of Modern Art all the time. It was walking distance from my school, the City University of New York. And I had my own season tickets to the Brooklyn Academy of Music for dance performances. Um, in fact, it's one of those performances by Pina Bausch at BAM. I invited my wife to go see that, and that led to us getting engaged. Anyhow, so I've got that background, both my own background and the affiliation with my wife. Um, but what how that connects with the topic of creative coding. Now, maybe you're familiar with that term. Uh, it's pretty simple. Coding has to do with programming, and creative means producing something really artistic. Um, It refers to computer programming to create art. Now, I'm not talking about using a program like Photoshop or Illustrator to create art. Those are very important tools, but really those are just tools. I'm talking about creating an algorithm, something that creates the art. Um, it's also different from the use of generative AI, something like Midjourney or Stable Diffusion or Dolly over the last year to create art. Those are important and they're fun, but they hand over an awful lot of the creative process. You write a prompt and you get a bunch of images and you choose. So it's efficient and it can produce some amazing things. But I'm actually talking about where you make things happen, and it's there's a few kinds of creative coding. Now, you can use it to make visual art, so still images or video or animations. Um, Creative coding can be used to produce artistic websites. I know several people who have done that. You can use it to produce audio. You can make music. You can use apps, or you can even use code not to produce the final work of art, but to tell you as the artist what to do. So it can, for instance, write the score for the music, or it can create a instructions for a dance, and then you put it into action. That also counts. There are a lot of things that go into the background of this approach. Really, if you think about algorithmic art or even just geometric art, there's a very, very long history of people who used mathematical and geometrical concepts in their art. Probably the longest tradition is Islamic art. Um, Huge amounts of geometric designs um, that are very, very intricate. Other places where you see the geometric work is my mother makes quilts, and her quilting is very, very precise and geometric. She also uh, decorates eggs in a style it's known as Slavic or Ukrainian egg decorating, where you use it's the actual word is pisanki. It's either pisanka or pisanki. It's wax and dye used to make very, very intricate patterns on eggs. Um, Also, in terms of um, the history of things that emerge over time, you may be familiar with what's called the exquisite corpse, which is it's a morbid term. It's actually the French. It comes originally from the French corps exquise, um, and it's a collaborative kind of art where, like, for instance, the simple version is you fold up a piece of paper and you draw on one piece of the paper, then somebody just looks and sees where the lines end and they continue it, but you nobody sees the entire drawing until it's done. Um, Musicians, a lot of composers have used one version of or another of this. Of course, Bach and the Baroque composers, people who wrote canons and fugues, had very intricate patterns that could be mathematically arranged. Uh, there was a there's a musical game. Mozart wrote pieces for this musical game. It's called dice music. I don't know how to say it. The German word is musikalisch Würfenspiel, Würfenspiel. It's just dice music, and it's a game where you have little fragments of music and you roll the dice to arrange them, and then that creates a piece. So it's a mix and match approach. Um, you know, in contemporary music, there is the genre of math rock, um, including an album I was listening to today, "Discipline" by King Crimson. Um, there's live looping, which has to be done in such a way that pieces can combine harmoniously. In dance, very famous choreographer Merce Cunningham used a lot of chance principles. He would throw the I Ching to create the order of a dance. So a lot of randomization, and people actually make wonderful art with Excel. Um, and so there are a lot of different ways to do it. Um, my own experience is, obviously I had a background as a designer and I was used to drawing things, but I let that go for several years. And then when I got all the way through graduate school, and I mean, it took me 7 years to get through grad school. And then it was while I was a professor that I discovered a programming language called processing. And processing is a language. The original version is based on Java. It's sort of a simplified dialect of Java that is adapted for graphical output. So when you work in processing, you type lines of code that are based on Java and it gives you a picture. Now, you could write a program that's put something out on the console, but that's defeating the purpose. Processing is there to make images and to make videos. Um, and I had a very small little book. I'm looking to see if I have it on the shelves right here. This is not the book, but it's about this big. Um, and that's how I learned to program. It's what I learned how to write functions. It's how I learned to work with objects. It's how I learned to work with variables and arguments. Now, I had done a lot of that stuff with, let me rephrase it. I had done a small amount of that stuff in my statistical work. I knew how to write code for SAS. I knew how to write syntax for SPSS. And I actually had been working with R for some time, but I always thought of those as very constrained. I am just trying to accomplish a small set of very specific things within this program, and I'm trying to get the right answer so it produces the output. But when I started working with processing, it's an exercise in creativity. You're making pictures, you're trying things, you're experimenting with them. I also have some experience with Arduino, the microprocessors, which are in the language that is closely related to processing. And the Arduino environment, the processing environment, by the way, the original version of processing was based on Java. There is a semi-complete implementation in Python, but it's not used much. There's a JavaScript implementation called p5.js that has become extremely common these days. JavaScript I still find a little hard to work with, but because JavaScript works natively in the web browser, it's a huge advantage. And so if you go to the processing website, you'll find stuff there. I also did creative work in a program called Max. Actually, there's three related programs: Max slash MSP slash Jitter. Max and MSP are for processing audio. These are used by musicians, and Jitter is used for processing video. And they go together in this environment that, unlike typing lines of code, it's a data flow language. So you have a big grid and you're putting objects in there and you're connecting them with lines. Maybe you've worked with a language, maybe you've done data with I think Nime works this way, and there are several where you are connecting things to get a sequence. Um, I have a tiny bit of experience with Ableton Live. I have a tiny bit of experience with making music in GarageBand. Um, what was really significant about all of this is, it opened up a whole other approach for me. I love working with data, but I also loved being able to explore things and learning new ways of working with things. Plus, when you work with a in a new field, you get whole new metaphors for the thing that you're working on. I got a whole range of artistic metaphors and artistic approaches to working with things. I mean, let me just explain why you as a data person may want to spend a little bit of time um, working with some of these creative applications. And again, I think processing or p5.js is a great way to start. Um, Let me just turn off this banner here. Um, Here's a few reasons that I recommend you try it. Number one, if you're not really comfortable with programming by typing lines of code, and maybe you frequently use a data application with drop-down menus, or so you use Excel, or you use SPSS or Tableau or Power BI, which are all fabulous programs, but they have a different way of engaging. And typing lines of code has this much more elemental feel to it. And if you're not really comfortable writing lines of code, I think processing is the perfect way. Writing and getting even just a circle or a square on a gray field and saying, I did something, you can see it, you can take a screenshot and save it. That's so much more rewarding than writing like a Hello World program or a FizzBuzz program, even though those are important first steps. But man, making a picture is it really is just rewarding. Also, when you're doing the visual things, it encourages trial and error because when you're working with data, there's usually a correct answer, or there's a proper way to do things, or there's a best way to do things. Um, with your creative work, that's usually not true. You get working and just doing a lot of what happens if I do this? How can I extend this? How can I change it? And it's such a wonderful thing. Um, you also learn how to break things down. You know, the way it works is like when I'm doing I when I have worked on elaborate projects. Um, when I have worked on elaborate projects, I would build it up in about 20 different steps. And let me see if I can turn off notifications. And but I would get graphical output at each point. I would have it like, okay, I'm going to draw the square. Okay, I can see that that works. Now I'm going to make the square a color. Good, that works. Now I'm going to make the square move. Okay, that's great. Now I'm going to make it respond to the cursor. Each of these is incremental, and you can save each version. And so it does build this kind of incremental, cumulative approach to coding, which may or may not work in your data work. If you are doing data visualization, then there's an absolutely direct application because in a programming language like processing, and there are others, you can make anything. I mean, literally, if it can be seen on a computer, then you can make it in processing. So if you've ever hit a wall and you're using a program like Tableau or Power BI and you're not able to produce the kind of graphic that you want, well, you can do it in processing. It might take some work, but you can do it. Um, by the way, a nice little tip is ChatGPT does know how to write processing code. And so you can get some assistance through ChatGPT. Don't let it do all the work on its own because I want you to be able to play with it too. But if you get stuck, it can help you do things. Also, once you get some experience looking at these visual results and seeing the examples of other work that people have done. So, for instance, there's a website called Open Processing where people share their work. And in fact, it has a web based programming environment. You can do your work in open processing. Once you see people's stuff, it fires your imagination. It also gets you thinking a lot more artistically. And I think you're less likely to produce crappy graphs. You're less likely to have a lot of the ugly defaults that show up in things. You're less likely to use the jet color palette, which will, might as well shoot yourself in the foot with that one. Um, and I think probably the last really big one is you're going to find your own voice. It's hard to tell by looking at an analysis who did it. There are sometimes telltale things, but man, when it comes to visual stuff, you have a voice. You have a distinctive way of doing things, a distinctive way of arranging your outputs. And it's I have a voice that I discovered while I was doing all this creative work. And so it's a wonderful thing to learn about yourself. Let me respond to something here. Christian asks, in your experience, what is the best language or application to quickly visualize features and structure of data too big for Excel? Um, you want to know a funny thing? I don't work with very large data sets very often. Most of my stuff does fit in Excel. That said, I usually use R. And there are versions of R that are adapted towards very large data sets. And actually, those of you are there, do any of you have experience using something that for visualizing large data sets? Um, I know R is capable of doing it, and truthfully, working with a language like Java is pretty fast. And so I think that might be a big one. It does require adapting the code. So mostly I would say take a little bit of time. I mean, seriously, you can learn the basics of processing in a weekend. So it's not a lot. And then also a question asks, is it processing or is it say R? Well, I like the language processing. I have never tried working with a large data set with it, though I know it can do it. There are some extraordinary examples that involve massive data sets that people have used. Like, for instance, every single, back when you could get data from Twitter, every single tweet that mentioned the word just landed and then plotting their coordinates at, here and there, or every online post that mentioned dumped, that got dumped by somebody. Raymond, by the way, says that he uses Python libraries for visualization. It's a great way to go. And you can do creative coding. You can create art in Python and in R. People do it. Um, I prefer using processing just because it's built specifically for that. Um, but those are some of the options. Now, I want to mention there's another consequence about doing some creative coding. Part of, again, aside from if you're not used to typing lines of code, it's a good way to get going. You can find your own voice. It can also get you a new audience and new work. My creative coding, for instance, I did several pieces that involved dancers. Uh, I got I got one gallery installation and one gallery piece displayed at a competition from it. I got a commission by a major modern dance company here in Salt Lake City for me to produce visuals and audio, and that for my wife to produce choreography several years ago for a piece that we called Hello World. It's a nod to the programming world. And then at my university, I got a 2-year presidential fellowship for faculty scholarship where we did live looping um, and video manipulation for modern dance performances. It was amazing. But you get a new audience, and those can lead to new gigs and new kinds of work. It led to me speaking at the Mountain West Arts Conference here in Utah about data topics for people who work for arts organizations. Um, Let me, believe it or not, our time is almost up, and I want to point out 3 things. Number one is I have a newsletter. It's on LinkedIn. It's called Data is for Doing, and sometime in the next 10 days, I'm going to write a newsletter on this topic about creative coding. So I'll be able to show you the examples of work. I'll give links to programs and links to the history, and you'll be able to get a lot more information about that. So um, if you're on LinkedIn, you can go see my newsletter. If you subscribe to it, you'll get it when it gets published in a week or so. Because my newsletter comes out at the end of the month because I'm a procrastinator. Um, the second thing is I just want to do one tiny little housekeeping thing. Um, Hi, the meeting is started. Um, we are here. Is it not running? Other people have responded, so I think we're all here. Oh my goodness. It says that it's waiting to start. I don't know what that's all about. It will be posted on video very soon. I just want to ask one thing. I do two of these online meetings. Let's try that again. Balloons came up out of nowhere. Um, that's a little weird. I don't know what that's about. I think it's maybe a Mac thing. Um, I do two of these events a month. I do one on Tuesday evenings. It's 8 p.m. for me. Um, is this a good time for you? I could do it an hour or two earlier. Later would be difficult for me. I have another one that I do on Thursday mornings, 10 a.m. for my time here in Salt Lake. Um, I would just love a little bit of feedback um, if if this time is good, or if a little. I could do again. I could do it an hour or two earlier, and I also have another one that happens about 10 hours earlier than this one. And if you could give me any indication of which one of those works for you, I would be grateful. So, and oh, by the way, you can just put a comment. Just put a comment. Let me know if this time is good, or if a little earlier would work better, or if the Thursday morning, at least Utah time, is a better one for you. I'm just trying to figure that out. Let me just finish by saying I love doing the creative work. I love referring to the creative work. I love referring to art in the stuff that I do in data. And I look forward to sharing more with you about this, something you can actually put your hands on in my newsletter. That again, it's the Data is for Doing newsletter on LinkedIn. Subscribe to that and you'll get it automatically when it's published in about a week. And I'd love to encourage you to do something more about that. Oh, one more thing. I do have an event. I have a data service event called the Data Charrette. If you go to my website, datalab.cc, you'll see it there at the top. And we might be doing our first event in 2 weeks, or we might be doing it in December. Remains to be determined. But I'm also going to be doing a creative coding for visualization project. And so if you go to the datalab.cc website, you will be able to get some more information about that as it evolves. We're actually going to give cash prizes. So maybe you can do something wonderful and get some money from it. Anyhow, with that, our time is up. I will share more in the newsletter, but otherwise, folks, thank you very much for joining me. And I hope things go wonderfully for you. Bye-bye.